This series presents information based in part upon theory and conjecture of the system of esoteric symbolism. The purpose is to suggest some possible interpretation, but not necessarily the only one, to the many mysteries we will explore. Welcome to Unlocking the Dream Vision. I'm your host, author R.J. von-Bruening. In this video series, we will be exploring the mysterious dream vision of Enoch, as explored in my book, Unlocking the Dream Vision, The Secret History of Creation. In this video, we will be exploring the sons of Noah and the coming of the Son of Man. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit the like button below and subscribe for future videos. In the story of Abraham in Genesis, we are told that he had two sons. The first is Ishmael by his wife's Egyptian handmaiden. In the dream vision, Ishmael is symbolically represented by the wild ass, who then went forth and multiplied. In the Bible, these people become known as the Ishmaelites, and possibly had merged with the Mennonites, or are the Mennonites themselves. No one is really quite sure. His second son, Isaac, is the white bull that beget a black wild boar and a white sheep. In Genesis, this black wild boar and white sheep are Esau and his brother Jacob, the sons of Isaac and his wife Rebekah. This commonly overlooked story of the birth of Esau and Jacob is in fact one of the most important stories in the entire biblical text, because it is actually speaking of the creation of the first Cro-Magnon Man. It will also provide an answer to the age-old mystery of who the giant hairy man of legend, known worldwide as Bigfoot or Sasquatch, actually comes from. I know that might sound a little strange at this moment, but again, as you will now begin to learn, this story contains vastly more information than is normally believed, but only if you understand the mystical symbolism. Now, the truth is, in this section of the story, there's not much in the way of mystical symbolism at work, but it will provide a new context for understanding this part of the story. In chapter 25 of Genesis, verse 21, we're told that Isaac's wife, Rebekah, is barren, and Isaac entreated to the Lord for her, and the Lord was entreated to him. And Rebekah then conceived when she was 40 years old. In the next two verses, we are told, and the children struggled together within her, as she said, "If it be so, why am I thus?" And she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said unto her, "Two nations are in thy womb, and two manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger." Genesis chapter 25, verse 22-23. Remarkably, Rebekah is told that there are two different types of people within her womb, and therefore they struggled with each other. This answer seems to have satisfied Rebekah, because the next verse speaks of the birth of these two children, and that there were in fact twins in her womb, just as the Lord said there would be. We are then told of the birth of these two children. Of the firstborn, we are told that the first came out red all over, like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. Soon after this, his brother was born, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. We are then told that the boys grew, and that Esau was a cunning hunter and a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. This small reference of Jacob being a plain man will take on new meaning as we take a deeper look into the next important part of the story, where their father Isaac was coming to the end of his life. In verses 3 and 4 of chapter 27 of Genesis, we are told that when Isaac was very old and almost blind, he calls his eldest son Esau and instructs him to "Take thy weapons, thy quiver and their bow, and go out to the field, and take me some venison, and make me savory meat, such as I love, and bring it to me, that I may eat, that my soul may bless thee before I die." We are then told that his wife Rebekah overheard this conversation between her eldest son and her husband. Once Esau had left to hunt, Rebekah then called her other son Jacob. She then tells Jacob of the conversation of his father and his brother, and that Isaac is going to give his blessing or inheritance to Esau. She then instructs Jacob to go out to the flock and bring her two good kits or small goats, so she can make the savory meat that Isaac so loved. Jacob would then present it to his father while impersonating his brother Esau in order to receive the blessing from his father. What follows in the next set of verses is one of the most fascinating arguments in the entire biblical text, an argument that will help provide us with a few answers to some of the mysteries we've explored so far. In this remarkable argument, Jacob tells his mother that this little deception of hers will not work, and that his father will curse him and not bless him. Jacob then tells his mother the reason this will not work is simply because, and Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, "Behold, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. My father peradventure will feel me, and shall seem to him as a deceiver, and I shall bring a curse upon me, and not a blessing." Genesis chapter 27, verses 11 and 12. Jacob is then told by his mother that any curse will be upon her and not Jacob. She then commanded him to do as she said, and Jacob follows his mother's orders and goes and gets the flock to bring her 2 kids, or 2 young goats. After Rebekah prepares the savory meat, we are then told how she disguises Jacob as his older brother. And Rebekah took goodly raiment of her eldest son Esau, which were with her in the house, and put them upon Jacob's, her younger son. And she put the skins of the kid of the goats upon his hands and upon the smooth of his neck. Genesis chapter 27, verses 15 and 16. As we can clearly read in these often overlooked verses, we are told that Esau was a hairy man, just like his father, and Jacob was not. Not only was Esau a hairy man, but he's also described as being larger and stronger than his brother Jacob, which is a surprisingly good description of the hairy man of legend, and that people still claim to see time from time around the world. With our esoteric knowledge, we can understand that this story is telling us that the original genetic matrix of Neanderthal is being broken into at least 2 separate and distinct genetic lines, with one being the larger, stronger, hairy man, and the other being our direct ancestor, Cro-Magnon Man, often known by his more scientific name, Homo sapien. This mysterious hairy man is unknown to modern science and does not have a name, but he is well known within myth, legend, and folklore, and modern conspiracy theory as the wild hairy man, more commonly known as Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the Yeti, or even the Yowie, and numerous other names from all around the world. One of the more remarkable things about this realization is that it also helps explain the long-standing medical mystery of the Rh negative blood factor. For those who are unaware of this Rh negative blood factor, it is the fact that almost all of us have what is known as an Rh protein on our blood cells, making most people Rh positive. But a few people, about 15% of the population, do not have this Rh protein on their blood cells and are known as Rh negative. The reason this is important is because if a woman who is Rh negative becomes pregnant by an Rh positive father, then there is a chance that the child will inherit the father's Rh positive blood factor. If this happens, then the Rh negative mother's body will produce antibodies that will attack the fetus, either killing it or terminating the pregnancy without any medical intervention. This Rh negative blood factor has been a medical and scientific mystery ever since it was first discovered. It is also a popular subject within UFO circles. But this mysterious Rh negative blood factor begins to make sense once you realize that it could have prevented the interbreeding between the lines of Esau and Jacob. Because if one line was Rh negative and the other Rh positive, then they would not have been able to interbreed with one another. I think it is a fair guess that this was done in order to prevent them from undoing the work of the gods. Now, this might come across as a radical heresy that the biblical story in the book of Genesis of Abraham, Isaac, Esau, and Jacob are actually speaking of Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon men may seem even more outrageous than the first men being Neanderthal. But But as you will now learn in just a few moments, there is some remarkable evidence to support all of this. But in order to understand this, we must return to the story of Genesis. The key to understanding this part of the mystery is the almost forgotten event of the death of Abraham's beloved wife, Sarah. In the story, we are told that Abraham purchased a cave from Ephron, the Hittite. This cave was located at the end of a field, and it's traditionally became known as the legendary Cave of the Patriarchs. After Abraham purchased this field, he then buries his beloved wife Sarah there. Later in Genesis, we are told that Abraham is also laid to rest within this cave, as well as many of his descendants. The Bible also tells us that his sons Isaac, the son Jacob, and eventually Jacob's sons Joseph are also buried within this cave. The Bible also tells us that Isaac's wives of Rebekah and Leah are also buried there. If this interpretation of the first men being Neanderthal and of Jacob being the first Cro-Magnon Man is correct, then we can make the prediction that there should be a cave, most likely located in the area of Israel, that contains both Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon Man remains together. Also, the dating of the remains should be all over the place because we are told of a multitude of burials that occur within a couple of hundred years within this cave. This is where myth and legend meet science, because there is in fact not just one cave but many caves that have been found around Mount Carmel in modern day Israel that contain both Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon Man remains, either together or in very close proximity to each other. One of the most promising sites is Kabbalah Cave, located close to Mount Carmel. It contains both Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon Man remains together, and that these remains have shown a wide difference in ages. This find has been quite a mystery to science since it was first found, and several different theories have been put forward to explain this site and the others that have been found around the area. But there is still not any real agreement within the scientific community of why these two different species of early humans would be found so close together in the same cave. Additional to the finds within the cave, there have been numerous other finds in and around this area of Mount Carmel that clearly show that both Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon Man occupied the same areas at around the same time. There has also been more recent finds that show that there is possible interbreeding going on between these two groups. Although this cave and the other sites have been a total mystery to modern science, we can now understand for the first time that one of these caves could possibly be the Cave of the Patriarchs that is remembered in Genesis. This would mean that the reason that these remains are found in such close proximity to one another could be that they are all possibly related to one another, their family. What is even more amazing is the fact that this is not the only cave that has been discovered that has both Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon Man remains together or within the same site. There has in fact been found numerous sites around the entire area of the Fertile Crescent where both species live close together with one another and possibly were interbreeding with each other. What is just as remarkable is that if we return to the Epic of Gilgamesh, we will discover a very similar story in the friendship between Gilgamesh and Enkidu, the wild hairy man, a friendship that has many parallels with Esau and Jacob in Genesis. In the epic, we are told of Enkidu, the wild hairy man that Gilgamesh civilizes through the help of a harlot. After Enkidu is civilized by Gilgamesh, we are told that they become the best of friends, as if they were really brothers. This is something that we did not address in the last chapter within the Epic of Gilgamesh. It is this friendship between Enkidu and Gilgamesh that ultimately drives Gilgamesh to embark on the great dangerous journey to a far and distant land in search of immortality from the legendary Noah-like figure. Although there are major differences between the stories of Genesis and the Epic of Gilgamesh, they both contain a surprising number of similar story elements. One of the best examples of this similarity is how both Gilgamesh and Jacob embark on a long journey. In the epic, Gilgamesh seeks out this Noah-like figure for the sake of his friend. In Genesis, Jacob also embarks on a long journey after deceiving his father, Isaac, and receiving the blessing that was meant for Esau. Both journeys are because of events surrounding their relationships with this hairy man of legend. This appears to show us that not only was the same creation process being undertaken at different sites around the Fertile Crescent, but that very similar events were unfolding within each group. Later we will see something that will add weight to this idea that these events may have been more controlled than traditionally believed. Additionally, it is also known that Gilgamesh was an actual ruler or king of the ancient city of Ur. It has been traditionally thought that the real-life Gilgamesh and ruler of the city-state of Ur is the original inspiration for the half-man, half-god mythical-like Gilgamesh character in the epic. It has also been traditionally believed that much of the epic was pure fantasy or legend, especially the parts that speak of the wild hairy man Ikudio. But now, as you can begin to understand with our new esoteric understanding, this traditional viewpoint may not be as correct as we have been led to believe. By understanding the connections of Jacob and Esau within Genesis and the idea that these stories are speaking of the very first Cro-Magnon Man, we can now realize that these ancient stories are much more rooted in fact than in myth and fantasy, as so many believe. This allows us to begin understanding why the ancient scribes would have thought Gilgamesh would have been half man, half god. It was simply because he must have looked physically different, like Jacob being a smooth man. This is something that is very easy to understand if this type of radical physical change had taken place. It would have been viewed as a result of the work of the gods, hence the connection of Gilgamesh to the gods. Also, as you're now beginning to understand, there is much more truth to the ancient myths and stories. But if and only if you understand the esoteric understanding of the mystical animal symbolism. This finally brings us to the point where we can begin taking our next steps toward understanding on just why the ancient scribes created and used the mystical symbolism in the first place. We must first pause for a moment and take a closer look at Cro-Magnon Man and what made him different from Neanderthal and, more importantly, ourselves. Cro-Magnon Man, also known by the scientific name Homo sapiens, is our immediate ancestor, and in many ways we are much alike. Physically, Cro-Magnon Man was anatomically modern with straight arms and legs, and was slightly taller than the contemporary Neanderthals. On average, they stood around 5'5" to 5'7" in height. They were more robust and a little bit more powerfully built than ourselves, but not as much as Neanderthal. Their bodies were generally heavy, solid, and had a very strong muscular structure when compared to our own. They also differ from modern-day humans in that they have a slightly larger cranial capacity than of modern-day humans. On average, having a capacity of Cro-Magnon Man appears to be around 1,600 cubic centimeters, which is about 150 to 200 cubic centimeters larger than the typical human of today. Again, if we look inside the skull of Cro-Magnon Man, as we did with Neanderthal, we'll discover almost the exact same thing, that although Cro-Magnon Man had a slightly larger brain than our own, it does not appear to be quite as complex as ours. It does, though, appear to be much more complex than Neanderthal, which appears to indicate that Cro-Magnon Man was slightly more intelligent than Neanderthal, but it's still highly probable that he had many of the same mental limitations as Neanderthal and Homo erectus. It is also reasonable to think that he also had the unique trait of only being able to understand complex advanced technologies in terms of divine power or magic, which seems to be something the gods wanted to preserve. It is this realization of the mental limitations of Cro-Magnon Man that allows us to begin a deeper understanding of who originally created and used the mystical symbolism. It also gives us our first true look into understanding the mind of Cro-Magnon Man, and hopefully a slightly better understanding of how his view of the world was different than our own. With this new knowledge, we can begin to understand that this unique mental limitation of Cro-Magnon Man and why he would have used symbols to represent what he saw around him. This then allows us to realize that the more mystical symbolism was created to represent something that he could not understand or comprehend. This is an understanding of the symbolism in a writing system that is vastly different than the one we use today. This is the next step in properly understanding the mystical animal symbolism. In order for you to understand this next step, we need to return to the animal symbolism of the bull that we already started exploring. When we read or hear the word oxen or bull or even cow or cattle, we normally picture the actual animal in our mind. We do the same thing when we see the actual animal. We will normally think of the word for the animal. In this manner, we normally view the word and the animal as being interchangeable with one another. For any additional attributes or behavior or other characteristics of the animal, we normally would use additional words to describe these. For example, we would say the bull is large and powerful animal, or the bull is dangerous animal because of its large strength and size. This is where we take our next step to learning that the true esoteric use and meaning of the mystical symbolism. The key is realizing that the mystical symbolism is not like or used in the same manner as a word to represent an object or action. It is in fact representing the attributes or characteristics of the animal that make it unique. This is the next secret toward understanding the mystical animal symbolism, that the mystical symbolism combines all the different elements of the animal into one unique symbol, where the attributes, characteristics, and the behavior of the animal are more important than the actual animal itself. To help you better understand this, we will return to the symbolism of the bull. When our ancient ancestors saw or used the symbol of the bull, they would not think of the animal as we do, but more importantly, they would think of the first men. Then they would think of the many different characteristics that made that bull such a unique animal. They would think of its special physical attributes as being large, powerful, dangerous, and sometimes as unpredictable. That this was an animal with great strength that made it difficult to control. They would also think about how this large, powerful animal is also a great beast of burden once it is broken, with the added benefit that you need only one bull to control an entire herd of cattle. So again, unlike words, the mystical symbolism of the bull is more than just the animal. It is the symbolic representation of not only the first men, but also the characteristics, attributes, personality, and the general behavior that make the bull such a unique animal. Once you understand that the mystical animal symbolism represents the physical aspects and the behavioral attributes of the animal itself, you can then understand that these are the more important elements of the meaning of the mystical animal symbolism in general. In this case, the animal symbolism of the dream vision, we can finally understand that these are the physical characteristics and the behavioral attributes of the animal that is important. It also provides us with the additional information that these first men and how they are thought of by our ancestors, and more importantly, the gods. In this case, the symbolism of the bull, we can now understand that it not only symbolically represents the first men of Neanderthal, because they were both physically like a bull, strong, fierce, and powerful, but more importantly, it provides us with the information that the behavioral attributes and the other traits of the animal symbolically represent how Neanderthal's behavior was. He was like a bull. He was a herd animal, but you only needed one bull to control many cattle, or one Neanderthal to control many others. But it could still be dangerous, and it had great strength that could be unpredictable in its behavior. Although it is a great and powerful animal, it can be broken, controlled, and used as a beast of burden or as food. Once again, we see all the makings and hallmarks of a rather unique and perfect slave for the gods. This new understanding of what the mystical symbolism truly represents also carries over to the next important animal in the story, the sheep. Traditionally, the symbol of the sheep has been interpreted as representing a type of moral purity, but now we can begin understanding that this is not the correct interpretation of this mystical animal symbolism. This symbol of the sheep not only represents the one we call Cro-Magnon Man, but it also represents the characteristics and behavior of the animal. As we all know, a sheep is a vastly different type of animal than a bull, with sheep being viewed as an easy animal to maintain, tend, and control. They also typically flock together, where only one shepherd and a few dogs are all that are needed to control hundreds, if not thousands, of sheep. As we continue going deeper into the dream vision, we'll see this idea of Cro-Magnon Man being viewed as sheep by the gods becomes a major theme of the story, which is spoken of many times. It is also another example of how highly effective this simple system of mystical animal symbolism is at containing huge amounts of information in plain sight within the literal story. This then brings us back to the dream vision with the sheep being brought to the land of the wolves, which are the ancient Egyptians. This is another example of how the ancient animal symbolism comes to represent a people based upon their cultural attributes and behavior based upon what we know about the ancient Egyptians and its people. It is easy to imagine that the foreign policies of ancient Egypt with the behavior of the people and how they treated defeated foes could and would make other people think of them as being much like a fearsome wolf, an animal that is traditionally viewed as a sneaky, highly dangerous animal that always runs in packs. They're also well known to ambush attack their prey, always attacking the weakest first, with them always being remembered as a nightmare that terrorized our ancient ancestors unlucky enough to encounter them. Although it is easy to understand how the ancient Egyptians could be viewed as wolves, we are told within the story that a sheep is brought to live among them, and eventually all of them, and that during this time the sheep multiplied and became many flocks of sheep within the land of the wolves. Remember, in the biblical story is Joseph and his 11 brothers coming to live in the land of Egypt. This journey to live with the wolves by the sheep brings us to the end of the book of Genesis. It also sets the stage for one of the most important parts of the entire story, the formation and creation of the unique idea of worshiping and following only one God by the ancient Israelites and their great exodus out of Egypt. In our next video, we will begin exploring this great exodus out of Egypt. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button below, and don't forget to subscribe for future videos.